Stop trying to be understood. There is a moment. Maybe it already happened to you. Maybe it's happening right now, somewhere quiet behind your ribs. When you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never going to listen anyway. You stop sending the long text message. You stop rehearsing your defense in the shower. You stop replaying the conversation where they misjudged you, trying to find the perfect sentence that would have made them finally see you clearly. And in that moment, something strange happens. You don't feel smaller. You feel free. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because I want to take you somewhere most people are too afraid to go. Into the part of yourself that has been quietly screaming to be seen for years, maybe your whole life, while you handed out pieces of your soul to anyone who looked like they might finally understand. I want to show you why that hunger has been lying to you. I want to show you that the moment you stop trying to be understood is the exact moment you become unstoppable. Not because the world changes, because you do. So take a breath. Let your shoulders drop an inch. And listen, not with your ears only, but with that older, quieter part of you that already knows everything I am about to say is true. Somewhere in the architecture of every human mind, there lives an ancient and exhausting belief that we are only real once someone else confirms it, that our thoughts don't count until they are validated, that our pain isn't pain until someone witnesses it and says, yes, I see you, yes, that is hard, yes, you are right to feel this way. This belief feels so natural that almost no one questions it. We are taught from the moment we are born that connection equals safety, and that to be misunderstood is a kind of small death. A child who is not understood by its mother learns very early that something is wrong with it, not with the mother's capacity to understand, but with itself. And so begins a lifelong project, one that consumes more energy than almost anything else a human being will ever do. The project of being comprehensible, acceptable, legible to other people. But here is the first hard truth I want to offer you tonight. The need to be understood is not the same as the need to be loved. And it is not even, in the end, the same as the need to be free. It is something else. It is a kind of addiction to mirrors. And like all addictions, it promises relief and delivers only more hunger. Think for a moment about the people in your life you have tried hardest to be understood by. Not the ones who already understand you with ease. Those relationships rarely require explanation. I mean the others. The ones who misread your silence as coldness. The ones who called your sensitivity weakness. The ones who took your ambition and called it arrogance. Or took your softness and called it foolishness. How many hours have you spent, really, if you added them up, trying to correct their picture of you? How many arguments did you replay at 2 a.m, building a better case, a clearer explanation, as if the problem were your communication and not their willingness to see? This is the trap. And almost everyone walks into it without noticing the door closing behind them. Because the truth is this: most people do not fail to understand you by accident. They fail to understand you because understanding you would require something of them they are not willing to give. It would require them to set down their own assumptions. It would require humility. It would require curiosity instead of judgment. And many people, most people, if we are honest, would rather be comfortable in their conclusions about you than uncomfortable in their curiosity. It is easier to decide who you are than to discover it. So when you exhaust yourself trying to be understood by someone who has already decided not to understand you, you are not failing. You are simply fighting a battle that was never winnable, because the other person never agreed to fight it with you. I want you to sit with something for a moment, something almost nobody says out loud. Being misunderstood is not a malfunction of human relationships. It is the default condition of being a separate consciousness inside a separate body, looking out at other separate consciousnesses through the fog of your own history, your own wounds, your own language. We are, every one of us, islands that have built elaborate bridges of words and gestures and shared customs to convince ourselves we are connected to the mainland. And sometimes the bridges hold, and sometimes they don't. This is not a tragedy. This is simply what it means to be a person. And once you accept this, truly accept it, not as a clever idea you nod along to, but as a fact you let settle into your bones, something extraordinary happens. The pressure releases. You stop treating every misunderstanding as evidence that something is wrong with you. You stop treating every person's failure to see you clearly as a referendum on your worth. Because here is what almost no one tells you when you are young. The people who misunderstand you are not actually talking about you. They are talking about themselves. Every judgment a person makes about you passes first through the narrow corridor of their own fears, their own unfinished business, their own unexamined shadow. When someone calls your ambition arrogance, they are usually revealing their own discomfort with ambition. When someone calls your depth too much, they are usually confessing that they have never been permitted to go that deep themselves. Other people's opinions of you are rarely a mirror of who you are. They are almost always a mirror of who they are. So why? Why would you spend your one wild and finite life rearranging yourself to fit inside someone else's mirror? There is an old and uncomfortable idea, one I have circled for most of my working life, that the things we cannot tolerate in others are usually the things we have refused to tolerate in ourselves. We call this projection. It is one of the oldest tricks of the human mind, and it is happening constantly in every relationship, in every family, in every office, in every friendship, almost entirely below the surface, almost entirely unconscious. When someone misunderstands you violently, not just casually, but with real heat, real insistence that you are wrong about your own experience, you are very often standing in the path of their own projection. They are not seeing you. They are seeing a version of themselves they have buried, dressed up in your face. And they are reacting to that buried thing, not to the actual person standing in front of them. This does not mean you are always right and they are always wrong. It means something more useful than that. It means the argument over who understands you correctly is very often not a real argument at all. It is two unconscious minds bumping into each other in the dark, each one convinced the other is the obstacle. Once you see this clearly, you cannot unsee it. And you begin to understand why the chase for understanding is so often a chase after a ghost. Let me tell you what happens to a person who spends their whole life trying to be understood. They begin to shrink, not all at once. It is gradual, almost imperceptible, like a coastline eroding. They learn which parts of themselves cause friction, and they sand those parts down. They learn which opinions invite conflict, and they stop voicing them. They learn which dreams sound foolish to the people around them, and they quietly bury those dreams where no one can mock them. Bit by bit, year by year, they trade pieces of their actual self for the comfort of being legible to others. And then one day, and this happens to more people than you would ever guess, including people who look, from the outside, wildly successful, they wake up and realize they cannot remember the last time they said something true without immediately checking the listener's face to see if it was acceptable. They have become so fluent in the language of other people's expectations that they have forgotten their native tongue. This is not living. This is translation. A lifetime spent translating yourself into a dialect other people find comfortable, while the original language, the one that was actually you, goes quiet, then dormant, then nearly extinct. I am telling you this because I suspect, if you are honest with yourself tonight, some part of you recognizes it. Some part of you has felt that quiet erosion. Some part of you has noticed that you laugh a particular laugh around certain people, a laugh that isn't quite yours. That you agree with opinions you don't actually hold, just to keep the peace. That you have, somewhere along the way, started performing a character called the version of me that is easy to understand, instead of living as the fuller, stranger, more contradictory person you actually are. And here is the cost of that performance. The cost almost nobody calculates until much later. Every time you bend yourself to be understood by someone who was never going to understand the real you anyway, you are not buying connection. You are buying loneliness. Because the relationship you build with that performance is not a relationship with you. It's a relationship with the mask. And no amount of approval for the mask will ever reach the person hiding behind it. So let me say the thing plainly. The thing this entire evening has been building toward. Stop trying to be understood. Not because connection doesn't matter. It matters enormously. Not because you should become cold or closed or indifferent to the people around you, but because the specific, exhausting project of making every person comprehend you, agree with you, validate your experience exactly as you intend it, that project is not connection, it is control. And control, when aimed at other people's perceptions, is a game you cannot win because you do not own the mirror. They do. What you can own, what is, in fact, the only thing you have ever truly owned, is your relationship with yourself. This is the turn. This is where the speech stops being about other people and starts being about you, because that was always where it needed to go. There is a kind of person who walks through the world without that desperate hunger to be understood, and you have probably met one, even if only once. They do not announce their convictions and then watch your face for approval. They do not collapse when someone disagrees with them. They state what is true for them, plainly, and they let it land however it lands. There is a stillness to them, a weight. People are often drawn to that stillness precisely because it is so rare, because almost everyone else in the room is performing for an audience, and this person is simply present. How did they get there? Not by becoming understood by everyone. They didn't manage some trick of communication the rest of us missed. They got there by doing something much harder and much quieter. They turned the demand for understanding inward. They stopped asking the world, "Do you see me?" and started asking themselves, "Do I see me?" This is the real work, not the work of explaining yourself better. The work of knowing yourself so completely that other people's confusion about you stops being able to touch you. Because here is the truth underneath all of this. The people who chase external understanding the hardest are very often the people who understand themselves the least. They are looking outward because the inward territory feels too uncertain, too dark, too full of rooms they have never opened. It is easier to ask, "Why don't you get me?" than to ask, "Do I get me?" The first question keeps the work outside, where it's safe, where it's someone else's job. The second question brings the work home, where it belongs, and where it is far more frightening and far more rewarding. I want to invite you, just for a moment, into one of those unopened rooms. Inside every person there lives a version of themselves they have spent years disowning. The ambitious parts that felt too much, the angry parts that felt too dangerous, the strange parts that didn't fit the family story, the desires that embarrassed them, the griefs they were told to hurry through. We push these parts into the basement of the self, and we call the basement private, and eventually we call it gone, though it is never gone. It simply waits there, in the dark, growing louder the longer it is ignored. And then we walk out into the world, holding only the acceptable, daylight version of ourselves. And we wonder why we feel hollow, even when we are surrounded by people who claim to love us. We wonder why approval never quite fills us up the way we hoped it would. The answer is almost always the same. We are asking other people to validate a costume, while the actual person inside the costume goes unseen. Not because the world refuses to see them, but because we never let them out of the basement in the first place. This is the deeper reason the chase for understanding always fails. You cannot be understood by others for a self you have not yet met yourself. No explanation is detailed enough, no communication clear enough to convey a person who is still, in large part, a stranger to their own depths. So before you ask the world to understand you better, ask yourself a harder question. Do you understand you? Have you gone down into that basement? Have you sat with the anger you call unacceptable, the ambition you call too much, the grief you call old news, the desire you call shameful? Have you met all of it, named it, claimed it as yours? Not to act on every impulse, but simply to know it is there, to stop being ashamed of your own depths. Because the moment you do that work, and it is work, real work, slower and harder than almost anything else a person can do, something remarkable happens. You stop needing the world's permission to be whole. You already know what's in there. Their misunderstanding can no longer convince you that you are wrong about yourself, because you have already done the deeper investigation. You have already met the evidence firsthand. There is a particular kind of peace that comes only after you stop needing consensus to feel real. I want to describe it to you, because I think many of you have brushed against it without naming it. It is the peace of saying something true in a room and watching half the room nod and half the room frown, and feeling, for the first time, completely unmoved by either reaction. Not because you've gone numb, because your sense of your own reality no longer depends on a vote. This peace is not arrogance. Arrogance is loud because it is fragile. It needs constant reinforcement, constant agreement, because underneath it is a person still terrified of being wrong. What I am describing is the opposite. It is quiet because it is settled. It does not need to win the argument because it was never trying to win anything. It was simply telling the truth, and the truth does not require a verdict to remain true. This is what waits for you on the other side of the chase. Not isolation, not coldness. A settledness so deep that other people's confusion about you becomes almost weather. Something that happens around you, not something that determines your worth. Let me speak now to something tender, because I don't want this to sound easy, as if I am standing here telling you to simply decide to stop caring what people think, as if willpower alone could undo years of conditioning. It cannot. The need to be understood is not a flaw in your character. It is wired into you by millions of years of evolution that made belonging a matter of survival. To be cast out of the group once meant death. Your nervous system does not know the difference between social rejection and physical danger. It reacts to both the same way. So when I tell you to stop trying to be understood, I am not asking you to override your biology with a slogan. I am asking you to do something slower and more honest, to build, over time, an internal home secure enough that the storm of other people's opinions stops feeling like a threat to your survival. This home is built one decision at a time. It is built every time you choose honesty over approval, even in a small moment. Even just admitting to yourself that you didn't enjoy the party you smiled through, that you don't actually agree with the family consensus, that the ambition you've been hiding is not too much, it is simply yours. Each of these small honesties is a brick. None of them feel dramatic in the moment, but over months, over years, they become a structure strong enough to live inside. Strong enough that you can walk into a room full of people who misjudge you and walk out the same person you walked in as. This is not about cutting people off. It is not about becoming hardened or distant. The people who truly love you do not need you to perform comprehensibility for them. Real love has room for confusion, for contradiction, for the parts of you that take years to unfold. The chase I am asking you to abandon is not connection with people who are willing to grow with you. It is the exhausting, endless performance for people who are never going to do that work. The people who want a simplified version of you because the real version is inconvenient to their story. Let those people keep their simplified version. It was never the truth anyway. It was only ever a shape they were comfortable with. You do not owe anyone your shrinking just because your full size makes them uneasy. I want to leave you, before we close, with an image. Imagine the self not as a single, fixed thing waiting to be correctly identified and approved by an outside jury, but as something more like a vast, dark forest, full of paths you haven't walked yet, clearings you haven't found, creatures in the underbrush you haven't named. No one standing at the edge of that forest, glancing in for a moment, could ever hope to map the whole of it. Not your mother, not your oldest friend, not the person who claims to know you best. They see a tree here, a clearing there, a glimpse through the leaves, and then they draw a map from those glimpses and call it you. For years, you may have been handing people that map and begging them to read it correctly, arguing with them when their version of the forest didn't match yours, exhausting yourself trying to redraw their sketch until it finally resembled the truth. But here is the freedom waiting for you. You do not need anyone else's map. You are the only one who can actually walk the whole forest. You are the only one with the time, the right, the capacity to wander every path, sit in every clearing, meet every creature in the underbrush, including the ones you've been avoiding, especially those. The forest was never meant to be fully understood from the outside. It was meant to be inhabited from within. So let the maps be wrong. Let people sketch their small, incomplete versions of you and mistake them for the whole truth. You know better because you live there. And the day you stop needing them to get the map right is the day you finally have the time and the peace to walk deeper into the forest yourself, to find the parts of you no one has ever seen, not because you hid them from the world, but because you hadn't found them yet either. That is the real work, not being understood, understanding. So here is what I am asking you to do, starting tonight, starting maybe in this very moment. Stop rehearsing the explanation. Stop replaying the argument where you finally make them see it your way. Stop handing your sense of reality over to people who never agreed to handle it carefully. Let the misunderstanding stand. Let some people walk away with the wrong idea of who you are. It will cost you nothing real, because the only person whose understanding determines your worth was never them. It was always you. Go inward instead. Sit with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Forgive yourself for the years you spent shrinking to be legible. Build that quiet, settled home inside you, one honest choice at a time, until the day comes. And it will come, when someone misjudges you completely, confidently, even cruelly, and you feel something unfamiliar rise up in its place where the old panic used to live. Not anger, not the urge to explain yourself for the 1000th time, just quiet. Just steadiness. Just the simple, unshakable knowledge that you do not need their understanding to be real. You were real before they arrived. You will be real after they're gone. Stop trying to be understood. Start, finally, trying to understand yourself. That is the only audience that was ever going to matter, and the only one who was ever truly listening.